So in Dealey Plaza then, which took place in November 22nd, 1963, the CIA then, assuming that they were involved in this, would have had to have created an invisible network of hidden information to counter Kennedy's image-based technologies, which were the whole basis of his, his whole raison d'etre was based, as we have said, on the creation and fostering of images. And so now the CIA would have had to have created in Dealey Plaza an invisible hidden network of disguises, radio transmissions, walkie-talkies that keep the individuals in the school book depository in communication with the people on the grassy knoll and whatever other conspirators happen to be walking around down on the ground there with everyone else. And this would have created an invisible pulse field of electromagnetic signals as a kind of electronic trap into which Kennedy then would have coasted in completely unawares, and his image-based technologies for once would not have availed him. They couldn't have, because the image cannot see these kinds of invisible electromagnetic technologies. They're not visible. They're audio-acoustic, and they configure what Marshall McLuhan called acoustic space. Acoustic space is spherical because we hear sound around us in a 360-degree radius. It's spherical, unlike Euclidean space, which is not spherical. It's rectilinear, has a single vanishing point, and it's rectilinear, and it encompasses its visual space because the eye unifies all objects by setting them into a three-dimensional space that is unified by the eye. Objects are in space, in three-dimensional space, the kind of space that opened up during the Renaissance with depth perspective in painting, and has been with us ever since the dissolution of perspective in the middle of the 19th century. Whereas acoustic space is 360 degrees, and since it's acoustically based, it's discontinuous. Every object in that space occupies its own space. Just like in the Paleolithic caves, when you look on the walls, each animal is sort of hovers, floating, disconnected from all the other spaces around it. Each thing is in its own space. Eskimo art, for example, is this way. When you look at an object such as a walrus ivory carving, it's its own space. It's not situated as one object amongst any in a space unified by the eye. It's tactile. And the sense of touch is discontinuous. As McLuhan says, for the blind, all things are sudden. Anytime you touch something, you have a new space when you step down vision. So we have this discontinuous world of spherical space configured by these electromagnetic technologies that the CIA tended to favor at that time. I'm sure they did use cameras, obviously, but it wasn't their primary medium. And so Kennedy would have floated right into this network, completely unawares, and for once his image-based technologies would not have availed him anything at all, although we do have Super 8 movie cameras there and Polaroids that the conspiracy theorists later could then go back and use to piece the whole thing back together and reanimate it. So he walks into the middle of this network, and the CIA, I think that the CIA and the old-fashioned Cold Warriors within it would have been profoundly resentful. And they were resentful against Kennedy for a number of other reasons, but they also would have been resentful of him as being this televisual kind of rock star who gets into office based on his image. It's really his image that got elected, not so much him. And I think that part of their resentment, you can feel that in this attempt to eliminate him using these audio-acoustic technologies. And so they create a pulse field that neutralizes him, and they use hidden identities, and we hear the gunshots, the event happens, people run up to the grassy knoll, and they look, and nothing's there. Because the CIA are professionals at making people disappear. The disappearing act is the great magic trick that they had been training themselves to do for years. So we don't find any evidence of anything, but we hear things. We hear the shots. So everything is audio-acoustic here. And then the conspiracy theorists who come along later have to piece everything together with the Zapruder film and the footage of the grassy knoll and so forth, which enables us then to begin to perceive that based on piecing these images together, there most likely was a conspiracy. So it's either that, or we see this the way the Warren Commission wanted us to see it, in which case we would have Lee Harvey Oswald as a lone gunman, which would then fit the assassination within the pre-existent celebrity myth of the death of the celebrity by a stalker, just as we saw in the previous episode here with Marilyn Monroe, whose death, if Donald Spato's theory was correct, was a kind of modified death by modified stalker. Here we would have Lee Harvey Oswald as the lone gunman who inserts himself into history by assassinating the Sun King. Now the Sun King is also known as the Oak King. He's the king at noon who battles with his lunar adversary, which in ancient medieval myth would have been the Holly King. So you have the Oak King versus the Holly King, the summer solstice versus the lunar winter solstice, and that puts Lee Harvey Oswald in the role of the lunar adversary, the Judas versus Christ, Set versus Osiris, the boar that kills Adonis. So he fits into that mode. Although the one bit of cognitive dissonance within that paradigm of seeing him as a lone stalker who decides to insert himself into history by killing a great Sun King is the fact that this scenario with Jack Ruby, who comes in and shoots him live on television — that's another televisual first, by the way, the first live murder caught on television. As far as I know, and all the other stalkers that have killed celebrities, they never generate their own stalkers. This would be a case in which a stalker generates his own stalker, Jack Ruby, which is a little bit odd and doesn't quite fit the theory, and is one of the main things that leads us to suspect that there was that Oswald was embedded in a larger web that sends ripples out beyond him and captures them in this mesh of complicated interrelationships. But in any event, so we have him assassinating the Oak King. He inserts himself into history, and this is all consistent with what the myth that Jean Baudrillard describes in America as America being based on an attempt to escape from history. The whole idea of America as a utopian colony that escapes the historical cycles that have hitherto governed all the other civilizations in history, especially European civilizations, don't apply here. We don't assassinate our presidents here. So the myth goes that tends to foster this lone gunman theory that America is based on an escape from history, and that it has suspended the laws that normally govern historical processes. Coups d'etat, are normal all throughout history. They're a normal part of the way history has worked everywhere. But in America, somehow, it's an ideal new world that has suspended all those old laws. So I think there's a predisposition on the part of our American academic literary establishment to just stick with the official case of the Warren Commission and just see this as an example of the celebrity myth of the stalker who makes himself famous by killing a famous person. But I don't think that's likely. I think there really was a conspiracy theory, as we have seen here, and that's the media studies version of the assassination of Kennedy. So that's the chapter that I've written in the book on Kennedy. It's actually a very short chapter, but there it is. And so the book, once again, is called Dead Celebrities, Living Icons, and if you have any interest in it, it's available on Amazon.